So I just opened the poll to ask you guys if you are able to get this kind of floating finger like situation by my instruction. Just hold it in front of you and then fixate on the display. And if you are able to do get this, then A, option A, and if it's difficult for you, then no, option B. No? Okay. For those people who are having difficulty, probably you first need to, I don't know, put your finger in front of you and then look at the finger itself first, and then look at somewhere behind this finger, like 30 centimeter behind or so. Display would be okay, but also wall or outside is also potentially better. And if you see that, if you change your sort of point of fixation far away, then you should be able to see something like this sort of a transparent finger. Because if you look at the far, then the view from the right eye and the view from the left eye differs, and that as a result, you should be able to see something like this. For those who said no, are you able to now see it? Okay, all right, good. How about other people? Still difficult? Okay, now you got it. All right, so the reason why I kind of introduced this is that this is a sort of basic observation of the binocular vision. When there is a conflict of the input from right eye and the left eye, then your phenomenology tends to alternate between the two. So if you do this for a while, then you probably start to notice that the finger is touched now sort of the connected to this finger, but separated from here, or connected to this finger, or both of the finger gets connected at one time. And this is sort of the multi-stable experience, right? At least, there are 4 types of experience there. And if you are very, very careful, each moment of the phenomenology probably changes much more finely in a dynamic manner. That's also, important to check if this is something that is, corresponding is happening in the brain or not. Okay, so let's move on. And the other way to induce this kind of rivalry is using the paper. So if you have a paper like this is my parking ticket recently I got in Perth. So if you make something like this, in front of you, and then put it like this in front of you, and then hold it with your left hand. And then if you can do that, then you will start to see that there is a hole in the hand. I strongly recommend you to try that. And then this hole in the hand starts to close or open over the time. And this one is recommended for those who couldn't get that floating finger illusion. Also, this is something that we also discovered relatively recently. And here, if you stand in front of a mirror, and then it's a bit of the meditative kind of practice, but just focus one of the 2 eyes into the center so that you see 3 eyes in front of you. like this way, then this also induces binocular rivalry in the natural vision. And we called it as a third eye rivalry. All right. So this means that the binocular rivalry happens in the natural life, and also it's not an artificial thing. And binocular rivalry can be also investigated in psychophysics. I'll just probably skip this. And then I introduced a continuous flash suppression over the last week to make this alternation duration to be more sort of the imbalanced. So you don't see one stimulus for really long time. Whereas the binocular rivalry case, if you do this, finger version or this, paper version, you notice that one thing dominates for a long time, but it eventually goes back to the other. And typically dominance duration is less than 15 seconds or so. Okay, that's a sort of the known kind of property of the binocular rivalry in the humans. So far, the summary of the tool is that the binocular rivalry can be induced in everyday life, and under constant sensory stimulation, conscious percept flips between two alternatives in a random manner. And also CFS can suppress one stimulus more reliably and for a longer time. But how do neurons respond during binocular rivalry? That's the next question. Okay. So, wait a sec. All right. So the next section asks this question: how do the neurons respond during the binocular rivalry? Neural activities during binocular rivalry have been recorded both in monkeys and humans. And the experiments are very hard to do, but it has been possible. So in the case of the monkey, people have trained the monkey to report which types of the stimulus they saw. If they saw something like a black and white pattern, then monkey was asked to pull the left lever. And if it's like a sunburst pattern, then pull the right hand and so on. And then after doing this, monkeys start to report something like a binocular rivalry. And then one very, very clever experiment is that to utilize the psychophysical properties of the binocular rivalry. As I briefly mentioned before, so when binocular rivalry, when controlled stimulus, like left eye is seeing the vertical grating and the right eye is seeing the horizontal grating and so on, then mean dominance duration of one stimulus is roughly like 1.5 seconds or 1500 milliseconds. And then a standard deviation is like 0.7 seconds and so on. And if you record these episode and then make a histogram, then this is what you'll see. And this is the human typical kind of psychophysics. And then one of the most important finding in the binocular rivalry is that if you change the contrast or strength of the stimulus, then it behaves in a completely counterintuitive manner. Okay, this is important. So if you change, for example, contrast from very weak 0.2 to 1.0, so it's almost like a faint stimulus to very clear black and white stripe, then what you'd probably imagine is that maybe I'll just ask with the 3AFC. But it's already kind of put on as an answer, so maybe I'll just continue to explain. The dominance duration of the stimulus whose contrast is changed from 0.2 to 1.0 stays the same. Okay, so the stronger stimulus does not dominate in the binocular rivalry longer time. There is a small increase here, but it's very, very small. On the other hand, the dominance duration of the other side. So when you're changing the contrast for your right eye, then dominance duration of the left eye stimulus change is dramatically decreasing while changing the other side. So does anybody have an idea on how this can possibly happen? It's probably very difficult to imagine. So maybe I don't expect anyone can usually guess that. But so one possible idea that has been invoked to explain this finding is that let's say, this right eye kind of, vision strongly inhibits the left eye, and the left eye also cross inhibit the left eye. But what's happening here at the first stage is not corresponding to the phenomenal vision. It is something above this area, and then that's more responsible for conscious experience. And therefore, it can produce this kind of counterintuitive finding with respect to the contrast change. That's one proposed hypothesis. But anyway, so coming back to how do we test the binocular rivalry in monkey, is to test whether monkey also reports something like this. So in terms of the duration distribution, indeed, they found something very similar to what human reported. Also, this contrast related finding is also reported as well. This is very difficult to imagine that, first of all, human shows this, because many people wouldn't immediately come up with this type of the result. Like, making one eye's stimulus stronger doesn't change the duration of the stronger stimulus, but the other one, it gets shorter. That's kind of counterintuitive. And in the case of monkey, that was the case as well. But monkey's case, the weaker stimulus to stronger stimulus does change the, the duration to some extent. So there is some kind of individual difference as well. But all in all, these kind of trend suggest that the monkey is most likely experiencing something very similar to humans. And then establishing this phenomenological property of the monkeys, then what the people have done is the following. So first, they made sure that monkeys are not making eye movements very carefully, and then recorded the neurons together with the monkey's report. So it's a report. So when the monkeys are reporting the right orientation, that's the red part here. And then when the monkeys are reporting the left orientation, it's this duration, okay? So this particular case, one particular neuron responded initially really like hugely, just prior to and also during the perception of this green left orientation. And then when it switches into sort of the rivalry dynamical kind of state after 4 seconds and so on, during the seeing of the red part or preceding the red part, there is an increase in activity here. And then preceding the green, there is an suppression of the activity. So if you assume there is some kind of 500 milliseconds or 1 second of the delay between the change of the percept to the button press or lever press, then this is indicative of the neural correlates of the this right orientation here. Stimulus is the same, but the percept is changing, and the report goes with the percept change, and the neuron goes with the report, not the stimulus itself. So by doing this kind of experiment quite extensively, they recorded same neurons over the trials, and then they found that this particular neuron started firing more a few seconds before the monkey reported the left field. So and this is the average over the many trials. And then this particular neuron case, 133, here, just before the reporting of the null stimulus, which 133 didn't like, it started to reduce the firing rate, and initially it's lower. Whereas the reports of the preferred stimulus is initiated at time 0, then just 500 milliseconds before it starts to increase, and then it remains high for a while and then goes down. And something like that, but in the opposite direction was found for another neuron, 131, in B4 in this case. And then that was a B4, but here is a IT neuron. And then when you do the same kind of experiment, in IT neurons, there are almost like one-to-one correspondence between what monkey reports and what the neuron is firing. And it's much more clearer manner. So here, face was reported, and then this particular neuron likes this face stimulus. So here, just like a couple of 100 milliseconds ago of the report, it starts to show the response. And then here, there's no binocular library because two eyes receive the monkey's face both. And then this is the response pattern. So the overall pattern of the result over this, many years of the binocular library experiment in monkey suggests that the lower visual areas tend to have a fewer percentage of the neural correlates of consciousness, and the higher areas like IT has almost like 100% correlates of the neural correlates. But the intermediate area, such as B4 and MT, has roughly 20% of the neurons that correlates with the report, but 20% of the neurons that are anti-correlated with the reports. We don't know exactly what this means, but that's a sort of the still the classical finding about binocular library. And then recently, my colleague also found that if you change the combination of these stimuli, like here it's a horizontal up or down kind of stimuli, and then they found this 20% correlates and 20% anti-correlates. But if you change this in a combination of the stimulus, it turned out that almost 100% of the MT can be correlated with the perception, depending on the combination with the other stimulus. So there's still like an unknown, but this type of the binocular library experiment has been ongoing and also has been utilized to find the neural correlates of consciousness in a precise manner at the level of the neuron firing. And yeah, so that was roughly like 98, and then this is 2013, still like 10 years ago of the review paper. It started to map out this type of the binocular library and proportion here. And currently, more of the focus is how these type of the different areas of the neural correlates generates experience, and that's completely unknown with this type of the method so far. And this is the type of the research that I'm going to talk about over the next couple of weeks. So in summary, so far, the monkeys can be trained to report their conscious perception during binocular library, and the compelling psychophysical evidence supports its validity. And extensive recordings of neural spiking revealed that less neural correlates of consciousness in the early visual areas, such as B1, B2, but more NCC in the higher visual areas, like B4, B5, it's up to 40%, including correlated and anti-correlated neurons. And the prefrontal cortex even has a higher cortical areas, and so on. So can we find a similar result in the human recording? That's the next question, because even though animals were trained to report these kind of things, maybe the results reported here may be reflecting mostly the property of the training, but not the conscious experience per se. So humans without any training is a very important kind of paradigm to test, and that's the next thing to discuss. Is there any questions so far? Okay, then I'll just go a couple of slides in the next session as well before we take a break. So what are the relationship between the neurons in the medial temporal lobes and the conscious experience of concepts? Do they reflect phenomenal seeing or concepts or meaning? That's the last part today. So medial temporal lobe, sometimes called the MTL, includes neurons that respond extremely selective way to a few concepts. And their responses generalize across different views of the same concept. And also, they also behave like IT neurons in monkeys' binocular rivalry experiment. And these response properties prompt us to re-evaluate the relation between the neural activities in MTB4B8 and ITFFA and the conscious experience. So at the end of this, today's, I'll just pose some kind of question. Can they really explain how we experience the world? That's the question. So, okay, so at the top, what you see here is the type of the electrodes that are placed in the epilepsy patients whose foci of the epilepsy is doubted to be around the hippocampus or amygdala and so on. So roughly speaking, medial temporal areas, to approach them around this, just in front of the ear or so, and then above, eye, they make a drill, hole through the drill, and then from here, they insert this type of the electrodes into the, areas of the suspected, brain structure. And then, as you see, at the tip of this, electrode, which itself is already very, very small, this depth electrode itself is almost like, 1 millimeter, or I forgot the diameter, but it's quite, thin, not like a straw level of the wire inserted, and then from there at the tip, these micro wires expand like this. Usually 8 or something like that will be, diverging from there. Okay, now it's a time, so I'll take a 4-minute break and then restart from this explanation.